Our speaker today is Evan Roth. He's a multidisciplinary American artist based in Paris. He's working with sculptures, prints, videos, and websites. And in the upcoming hour, during his talk, he will take you on a journey about art, politics, culture, the misuse of communication technologies, and how all of these are connected to each other. Please give a warm round of applause for Evan Roth, our speaker today. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm really humbled and honored to be here. This is my first time on this side of the internet with you all, so thanks so much for joining. Yeah, my name's Evan. I'm an American. I'm living in Paris at the moment. I'm an artist, and so I'm going to talk a bit about the art I've been making the last few years, how it's changed as the internet's changed, and hopefully weave some threads through here. The work I'm making is primarily shows up in these three areas of the gallery: public space and the internet. The mediums I'm using are often quite different, but historically the work I've been making has been connected by this relationship between misuse and empowerment, and how misuse can kind of be this lens that we, as we all know, look at technologies, but lots of things in life around us to sort of see things that have other sort of unintended uses, right? To make things like consumer domestic products much more interesting, right? So this is the Doomba, this old internet meme, right? But so good, right? Such a wonderful gift that the internet gave us with the Doomba. Like, I can't wait until, I really feel like this should be in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. This is one of my favorite sculptures I've seen in the last few years. But for me, I try to have like Doomba vision when I'm doing activism or when I'm doing art, and thinking about like what else can I duct tape knives onto it to make it more interesting than it was the way the manufacturer sort of advertised it to me, right? And so that's kind of a main inspiration for a lot of the artwork that I look at, that I'm a fan of, and that I'm trying to make in my own practice. And so two maybe more specific themes I'm going to try to show through different projects are, one, this idea of technological empowerment, which is part of the reason I became an artist, and the other, this idea of visualization through misuse. And my history with technological empowerment went back to when I was an architect and I was at university, and I had one class about computers that my dad sort of forced me to take, and I didn't think was that interesting. This was back when I was literally still doing like graphite with a straight edge on vellum, right? This is like the first class where they were introducing 3D modeling in AutoCAD. And there was 1 week about the internet, and I have this like really vivid memory where the professor brought up this fetch window on an old Mac and like edited a text document and dragged it in, and the dog ran it up to the internet, and then he hit refresh on the browser and it updated. And of course, this is like small news now, but for me, this was huge. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I really just couldn't believe that for free I could say anything to anybody and nobody could really censor it. It just seemed like it was too good to be true, and that was kind of the death nail on my architectural career. Like, I would go on to graduate and work for a couple of years, but very quickly was falling in love with the internet in the early kind of like Flash days. Remember that time? It was really fun. And so I was coming home from my architecture job and sort of trying to learn code and kind of had my first introduction to open source, like reading Joshua Davis's PlayStation FLA files, if anybody remembers that day. But that was kind of my introduction to technology, and it was really empowering. Like, it was a feeling that I still remember and try to like hone in on when I'm getting more depressed these days. And so how that showed up in some of my work, I'm going to start around like 2005 with some projects that I've been doing up to projects I've been doing right now. Back in 2005, 2006, I co-founded an organization called Graffiti Research Lab with a friend named James Powderly while we were in residency at IBEAM in New York. And the basic idea we had with Graffiti Research Lab was that technologies were getting a lot cheaper, to the point where they were almost getting disposable, like LEDs. Digital projectors were getting really cheap. Lasers were getting really cheap. And we were interested in trying to make projects that would start to get graffiti writers and activists talking to the free software movement more, like have a sort of common dialogue for these two very different groups of tool builders. And so with that as like a premise, we sort of thought of ourselves as the Q branch for graffiti writers, right? I'll just show one quick project. This was called Laser Tag. This was in retrospect, very simple computer vision project, but we would basically go out with a digital projector, and we would invite activists, and we would invite graffiti writers, and we would set up on the sort of biggest buildings that we could find in town. And we would just have this kind of open system. Like, the only rule set we had with the project was there couldn't be a censor button. People had to be allowed to say whatever they wanted. Most of the times we did it without permission, which isn't saying much, because at the time there wasn't a lot of people projecting in public, so there weren't a lot of sort of laws in this sort of gray area. So even when the police usually came, it was more of a conversation than a ticket. And so we were making, this is one example of lots of projects we were making where it was kind of about amplifying free speech, like trying to use technologies that were getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to level that playing field between people who live in cities and people who advertise in cities, and what kind of visual language and visual communication we have in both those places. So that was the work Graffiti Research Lab was doing. At some point we realized with Graffiti Research Lab that the sort of technical hacking we were doing was much less interesting than the more social hacking we were doing. And we were getting much more press than we deserved, and we were trying to figure out why that was happening. And one thing we sort of came to was we were sort of fulfilling this narrative that the media wants, which is that we are living in the future now, right? Which is why everyone's reporting on hoverboards now. Like, we're here, you know? And graffiti writers with lasers was one of those apparently like monumental future points that we had hit. And so the media was starting to write about our projects, and so we realized that this was sort of a social hack where we could start to empower other people with maybe more marginalized voices to get in the newspapers more often. And so our mission changed slightly, and so we kind of morphed the energy that we had with Graffiti Research Lab into this group called the Free Art and Technology Lab, which didn't really have a sort of set code or manifesto, but the basic idea was that we were going to use what Ivan Franko called radical entertainment, or this idea that you can make sort of engaging media on the internet that people are going to want to click on, not because they agree with the politics, because they want to see people acting a fool in the streets, right?